Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Bird. Sorry, I'm used to doing my other podcast where I have to give my last name. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Yes, so I've been going back and forth. My other podcast is called the Sixth of Story Podcast. I do it with James Kennedy, who is another person who is all over the world of children's literature, as is our guest today. So everybody, welcome back. This is the 100th episode of Marvel Reread Club. It is also the final episode covering the books of 1966. We've covered all the monthly books. Now we're going to cover the annuals. And we have a very special guest. We've had a lot of big time people come on the show, and we've been very grateful to have them over the course of our 100 episodes. But this may be the biggest. He won a Caldecott Medal for Best Picture Book of the Year for his book, The Adventures of Beagle, the Unimaginary Friend. He won a National Book Award for his coming-of-age graphic novel, A First Time for Everything. So everybody, welcome to Dan Santat.
All right, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I didn't realize it was the 100th episode. It's an honor.
You are a fantastic graphic novelist. Your graphic novel, Sidekicks, is just amazing. I should point out you also illustrated a book written by my wife, Betsy Bird. You illustrated a book called The Great Santa Stakeout, as well as so many other acclaimed things you've done. I see it says here on your Wikipedia page you have 2 sons, a bird, 3 dogs, and 2 cats. So that is that is more work than anybody should ever have to do.
Right. My wife just loves animals. I had to shove all the dogs outside because, you never know if a stray, stroller is going by or the mailman comes to drop off a package and then they just go bonkers and then this whole podcast has to be reshot.
Well, I live half a block from a fire station, so that can often do it.
So what is your podcast history, Dan? You must surely frequently be a guest on podcasts. You must surely have your own setup.
I've done many podcasts. A lot of them talk about the craft of making books. Generally a lot of the questions entail how I got started into art. I've done so many. I feel like I've told the same story over and over again. I mean, in a nutshell, I graduated in 93. I went to UC San Diego. I studied microbiology because my parents wanted me to grow up and be a doctor. And then, maybe midway through college, all my roommates, they realized that I just really absolutely loathed science. They knew that I loved art. I just kept thinking to myself, no, I have to do this. My parents insist that I become a doctor. I went through with it. I got a microbiology degree. I even took the DATs, got accepted into dental school. And then, my roommates, they were just so persistent. I remember one of my friends said, aren't you just curious to see if you're good enough? Like just good enough to get into art school? And that didn't feel like something that was defiant. It just felt like, oh yeah, just to pique my own curiosity. Am I good enough to get into art school? I got accepted into the Art Center College of Design. And then once I got accepted, like that was it. I just said, oh, maybe this is a possibility.
How did your parents react when you told them that you had gotten into art school and were going there?
Oh, this is a fantastic story because I had already found out that I got admitted. I was with my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. And I had my admission letter. I went through graduation, went through the ceremony with cap and gown. And
for your medical,
for my microbiology degree that I do not use. Right. And we were at dinner. I think it was in like Del Mar, California, at this really nice restaurant. And I'm sitting there and I'm forgetting the name of that motivational speaker who's really tall, has the really white teeth.
Tony Robbins.
Tony Robbins was sitting at the table right next to us. And he was paid some exorbitant amount of money to talk some sense into like some rich guy's 17-year-old daughter who just looked like she did not want to talk to Tony Robbins, right? And
so in other words, she looked like a normal human being.
Right. And Tony Robbins has 2 volumes. One is completely silent, and the other one is like sonic jet, right? Like he's just a billion decibels. It's like on or off. And that was just really adding a lot of tension to the conversation because he was just so obnoxious, right? And my dad's sitting there, and I remember he's like cutting his chicken, And he says, "Oh, so are you excited to go off to dental school?" And I said, "Dad, I got into art school." And he just stopped and he looked at me, and you could just see in his eyes, you could see his life leaving his eyeballs, like just looking at me like, what's happening right now, right? And before he could interrupt, I decided to interject because I didn't want him to squash this dream, and I just said, "I'm going to do it whether you like it or not." And he stared at me, and you could just see the hamster wheel spinning in his brain, kind of assessing the situation, figuring out like, well, where do I go from here? There's two directions we can go. And he could insist that, what I was doing was a terrible mistake, and that I was no longer his son, or he could embrace it. And he looked at me. Oh my gosh, I remember how terrified I was. And he looked at me and he said, "I had a dream that you and I were going to be doctors together. But ultimately, I just want you to be happy." And it was the most liberating feeling I ever had in my life. It was the first time I actually felt like I was allowed to be myself.
That's a great story. So you are one of the most acclaimed graphic novelists in the country, and that you are one of the only graphic novelists to have won a National Book Award, which is a very rare honor for a graphic novelist. But what is your history with Marvel Comics? What did you grow up reading them? Had you read any of these comics we're going to be discussing today before?
So I have a very fond love of Marvel Comics because back in the day, kids could be paper boys, right? They could deliver newspapers, boys, girls. And I had a friend who lived in the neighborhood. I have to give him a lot of credit. His name was Kyle Hopple. He had a paper route, and he asked me to substitute for him for 1 month when he and his family went on vacation. And I remember I went to his place, and he opened this trunk, and the trunk was just filled with Marvel comics of every title. Prior to that, like my knowledge of comics was, Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes and all that. But, I never went into a liquor store or a Walden Books and like looked at the spindle of comics, right? And then
wait, a liquor store?
Yeah.
What kind of liquor store had a spindle of comics?
You guys didn't have that when you were growing up?
No.
Yeah, because you go to the liquor store.
The liquor stores did not have comics.
You go to the liquor store, and then there'd be the candy section, and then next to the candy section was the wire spindle, and it had all the monthlies in there.
I guess maybe California is different. We've got all sorts of different blue laws around here about very much restricting what's going on at a liquor store.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yes, children are not allowed to set foot in liquor stores.
Yeah. So, I would go to the liquor store every month and buy all the monthly comics, right? And so...
okay, that's blowing my mind right now.
So he's showing me all these comics. He's showing me... And he's giving me the backstories, and he's showing me all the connections through all the storylines. And I realized, like, this is my soap opera. I need to know more. And I remember looking at all the artwork and just scratching my head and trying to figure out, how do they know how to draw the muscles? How do they know how to draw feet? How do they know how to draw hands and knees, right? Because my parents never let me take art classes. So a big part of my art education was to buy comics. And I was strictly a Marvel guy. I would read these comics, and then I would find a cover or, an image like the hero in like a really cool pose. And I used to have this routine where on Friday night, 8 p.m., I'd sit in front of the Dukes of Hazzard, and I would draw, I would try to copy something from Todd McFarlane, Arthur Adams, one of my personal favorite that a lot of people don't talk about, Rick Leonardi. Like, I love that guy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love Rick Leonardi.
Yeah, Rick Leonardi is so good.
So, Dan, you're about to do some work for Marvel now involving...
Yeah. So, it's... I was approached by... I actually had a meeting. I had a meeting at Marvel. God, this was right before the pandemic. Probably like 2019, went into the offices, and so they've been wanting to get into the children's publishing aspect of things for a long time. They approached me to do a Marvel picture book styled in a comic fashion. And so I've been really excited about this because it's one of my favorite characters is the Hulk. This has been a story that's been lingering in my head for, oh God, probably a good 7, 8 years. And I just kept thinking to myself, if I ever had an opportunity to do this Marvel story, this is the story I would like to do. And so the working title right now is called Me, Hulk, Sincerely Bruce. And basically the story starts with Hulk waking up in a fast food restaurant, right? And he's curious. He's like confused because there's no villains around, there's no danger, and so he's wondering like, why am I here? Why did Bruce turn into the Hulk? And then he realizes that there's pickles in the hamburger. And Bruce absolutely hates pickles, and he was so angry about it that he turned into the Hulk, right? And so
does.
And so he shrugs it off. He's like, okay, that's just one thing, right? And then again, he turns into the Hulk again, and he's in Bruce's car, sitting in a car. There's no traffic or anything, and he's confused once again, like, why am I the Hulk? And there's no danger, there's no villains. Realizes there's like a song on the radio that Bruce absolutely hates, right? And so he realizes like, okay, this is an issue, right? And so he gets a piece of paper and a crayon and he writes a letter to Bruce because they never get to meet in, face to face.
Right.
He writes this letter basically, in his Hulk voice saying, me, Hulk, think you mad for wrong reasons. Signed Bruce. Signed Hulk, right? Puts it in his purple pants, those iconic purple pants that he wears. And so waits to turn back into Bruce. Bruce then feels this letter in the purple pants, looks at it, and it's a letter from the Hulk. And it basically, he reads it and he's outraged. He's like, how dare you? Right? And he writes a letter back to the Hulk. And, how dare you tell me how to feel? My feelings are valid. I should be allowed to feel how I want to feel, And Hulk writes back, and they just write these letters back and forth. And I guess the best way I can describe it, it's, The Notebook, starring Hulk and Bruce Banner.
When will this book be coming out?
I believe January next year.
Fantastic.
So let's go ahead and get on to these 3 books. So I should start off by apologizing to you, Dan, because we've had other guests come on to do the annuals of the previous 3 years. And in each case, those annuals were just amazing. Fantastic Four annual number 1, 2, and 3 were all amazing. Spider-Man annual number 1 and 2, back when Steve Ditko was on the book, were just amazing. And Thor annual number 1 was pretty great. Now, we have these 3 books. I thought none of them were particularly great. I liked the Thor the best, but the 3 books we're doing today are Fantastic Four annual number 4, Amazing Spider-Man annual number 3, and Thor Giant-Size number 2. What did you think of these books, Dan, before we jump into them?
I'll put it this way, America was living in a different time, right? So there's definitely this very, how can I put it? Not naive, but very innocent kind of sensibility about the world, and definitely has not aged as well as one would hope. But then there's also there's aspects of the comics that I'm reading where the pacing is just a little rushed. You're looking at the Thing facing off at the Hulk, and literally 2 panels later, the Thing is wrapped in iron beams, and you're like, well, so much for the fight, right? Like in the Spider-Man annual, Spider-Man gets this request to join the Avengers, and Spider-Man is basically saying I didn't ask, and then he goes in there, and they're just like, well, how do you feel about taking a test? He's like, test? They go, whoa, don't get so mad there, Spider-Man. And they start fighting him, and I'm like, what is happening? He didn't even want to be there.
This is such a testy issue in every sense of the word. Let's go ahead and jump in and discuss this book more. Amazing Spider-Man, annual number 3. I will quickly sum it up, and then we will go ahead and discuss it more in depth. So we have To Become an Avenger, guest starring the Incredible Hulk, houses for a zingy combo, script written by Smilin' Stanley, layouts by Jazzy Johnny Romita, penciling by Dashin Donnie Hack, inking by mirthful Mickey DeMeo, lettering by adorable Artie Simek. So when Romita first disappeared off Daredevil, and this turned out to be disappearing for good, there was a little note going like, oh, Romita is missing this issue of Daredevil because he is inking the Giant-Size Spider-Man. Or it didn't say inking, it said because he is penciling the Giant-Size Spider-Man that is coming out. So I'm like, well, we lose Romita off Daredevil, but at least we're going to have a Romita Spider-Man annual, which would be great. Well, turns out he is just doing layouts here and looks like rather rough layouts. And Don Heck is finishing the penciling, and this looks more like a Don Heck book than a John Romita book.
It does.
And DeMeo is not helping Heck very much on the inking. I'm not a big fan of the art in this issue, which is a shame because I was looking forward to a great Romita annual. We have the Avengers are sitting around debating whether or not to invite Spider-Man onto their team. Bizarrely, the Wasp, and I think this is not the first time we've seen this, the Wasp hates Spider-Man because wasps hate spiders.
Right.
Which, she does not have... She was never bitten by a radioactive wasp. She does not have wasp-esque qualities. She does not have the personality of a wasp in any way.
I think she is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes, she is. But she is...
Most likely.
Just utterly bizarre character note for her to dislike Spider-Man because wasps dislike spiders. And do wasps even dislike spiders that much? Is there a big war going on between the wasps and the spiders that I don't know about?
If there is, I want to stay far away.
Yes.
She was also flirting with everybody. She was really oh, here comes Daredevil and his hot bod. And then same thing with Spider-Man. Wasn't she kind of the same way? Maybe I do like spiders.
That is not out of character for her, but hating spiders is. So then they decide to invite Spider-Man to the team, but they decide to do something they have never done before, which is have some sort of test. Now, let's look around the table here and see how all of these people joined the Avengers, because basically we have 4 original Avengers here. We've got Captain America, who was unfrozen and then was being brought home when suddenly he had to save the Avengers from broccoli men who had turned them into statues. He was a member before he knew it while in the midst of this broccoli men issue. And we have Hawkeye, who joined the team because he showed up, broke into Avengers Mansion, tied up Jarvis, bound and gagged him, and then demanded to be made a member of the Avengers. None of these people ever passed a test to become Avengers. None of these people ever had to go through any sort of application process to become Avengers.
And yet they make it clear here that it's we have a policy. Every Avenger must be tested. And it's no, you don't. And also, where did Thor and Iron Man come from?
Yeah, they haven't been members of the Avengers for a while. So
they haven't been members of the Avengers for more than a year, yeah.
So then they go ahead and decide to go out and look for Spider-Man. Thor finds him. The top panel of page 6, that looks like maybe Romita Thor. That looks pretty good. But panel 3 on page 6, that looks pure heck. That is heck Thor. Does not look like it has an ounce of Romita in it, which is a shame. So then Thor invites Spider-Man to join the Avengers. He goes home as Peter Parker to Aunt May. He thinks about it, it would... on the one hand, totally break her heart if this ended up exposing that I'm Spider-Man, but on the other hand, she needs the money and she can't afford her prescriptions, and I might make some money being an Avenger, so he can't decide. But then he decides, I'm going to go and do it. Goes back. Page 9, Mickey DeMeo, who is really Mike Esposito, is sometimes a better inker and sometimes a weaker inker. I think there's just a atrocious lack of blacks on page 9 that, you just look at Captain America and Spider-Man and they just look overlit. They just have not enough shadows on them.
Everything about the art in this issue seems rushed. I've got some possible thoughts on I can talk about later, but it just all looks rushed.
Yeah. So then they say, okay, we're going to go ahead and invite you to join the team. And then all of a sudden they get in a big fist fight, which is, I could try to explain to you how exactly they end up in this fist fight, but I can't do that because it makes no sense. They're like, why don't you leave the room so we can talk about it? He's like, I'm not going to leave the room. What are you talking about? And then soon they're in a big old fight and they're all beating the crap out of each other for several pages. And then things finally settle down a little bit. They're like, okay, everybody, just cool it, man. And then they're like, all right, here's what we're going to do. Our test for you is to do something that the entire Avengers group has failed to do over and over and over again, which is go out and capture the Hulk. And we're going to have you, with your much weaker powers, do it single-handedly. This thing that Thor and Iron Man and Captain America and Giant Man working together have never been able to do. So he's like, okay, I'll go, wing, and he goes off and they're like, wait, we didn't tell you why we wanted the Hulk, but he's already gone. And then Thor just says, we can explain later. I do proclaim that the test is begun. So then he stops off at the Daily Bugle, talks to J. Jonah Jameson, Frederick Foswell. Foswell says Hulk's been spotted near the Gamma Ray Research Center, presumably Bruce Banner looking for a cure.
I don't know if I would be happy to have a Gamma Ray Research Center in the center of Manhattan. Yeah. That just does not seem like a good idea.
Gamma rays everywhere.
So we did not bring you on to discuss a Hulk issue, which is a shame because that's what you're writing on. But hey, here's the Hulk. The Hulk shows up in this Spider-Man annual, and we have a pretty good, this is my favorite part of the issue, a pretty good Spider-Man Hulk battle. They are beating the crap out of each other, and then Hulk ends up punching a gamma ray testing device. He gets bathed in gamma radiation, and he becomes Bruce Banner. I really dislike the inking. To me, I was inking on page 18. Looks like it was inked with a crayon, and it just looks awful as Peter Parker talks to Bruce Banner. I do think this issue sort of coheres here. This is Spider-Man is in a difficult position. He realizes that it would be wrong to kidnap certainly Bruce Banner, but even the Hulk realizes the Hulk isn't that bad a guy. Certainly Bruce Banner isn't a bad guy. And he decides, I'm not going to bring him back to the Avengers. Instead, I'm going to go tell the Avengers, screw it, I'm not joining you. I failed in my test, which he does. They are like, dude, we wanted the Hulk for good reasons. What? No, it's... And then, too bad, he's out of there. He's gone. He goes back to Aunt May. He's very depressed. We have Venetian blinds. So his
the return
symbol of ennui, the return of the Venetian blinds. He's got drapes too. He's got drapes and Venetian blinds. Dan, when Steve Ditko was the writer, penciler, inker on this book, Peter Parker's existential dread was always symbolized by Venetian blinds.
Not only his, anybody's.
Yeah. Well, then I guess my parents had existential dread because they did the same thing.
So, Dan, what did you think of this issue?
It was absolutely, it was fun, but it was absolutely absurd at the same time. One of the things that really stood out in my mind was the fact that the Avengers really didn't have any foresight into planning. Right. It's let's bring Spider-Man. Even Thor was like, we command you to come to the Avengers and audition. He's like, I didn't ask. How dare you? Like he was insulted. Like, how dare you? It's such an honor. And then he shows up. This is the part that really cracks me up. He shows up and they said, yeah, maybe we should give him a test. Like, we don't have a test in mind, like, wow, none of us planned ahead for any of this. What should we do? And then just the short fused temper that everybody had that just broke into fisticuffs. And you would think that Spider-Man fighting all of them in that room and warding them off would be enough. Like, okay, yeah, you can carry yourself pretty well,
that's
right?
The test. He just managed to fight all of you, and he was not flattened.
Yeah, you literally fought an entire room of us and fared well. No. Go get the Hulk.
This whole thing was just an elaborate hazing ritual. This is just a massive prank on Spider-Man.
Well said, because they felt like a bunch of frat guys that were just like trying to initiate a freshman, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. To me, this whole thing reads like a Spidey super story.
Yeah.
Right. It's just the quality of the dialogue, the simplicity of everything. It just seems like Stan was not putting any heart or effort into the scripting of this thing whatsoever. It's just like, I just need to have speech balloons that say what people are doing. Let's just go ahead and do this thing. And both the art and the story just seem incredibly slapdash in this issue. Now, one of the things that I've read is that Ditko has specifically said that when he decided to quit Spider-Man was when he was trying to come up with ideas for Spider-Man Annual number 3. And then he was like, why am I doing this? I'm not happy here. I'm going to quit. And that, Ditko has been gone from this for 4 or 5 months now.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Ditko was planning on doing that far back makes me wonder if maybe the production time for the annuals, for some reason, because they were, had more pages or whatever, had to be done further in advance.
When Romita disappeared off Daredevil, that was like 4 months ago. And it said at the time, it's because he was working on this book.
Right. But it seems like maybe that was already right at the deadline. right? So
Yeah.
because of how this is working here. And I remember back when we were talking about Fantastic Four Annual #1, we had the, as you put it, the Kirby Apocalypse like several months earlier. And I had speculated that he was putting all his heart and soul into Fantastic Four Annual #1 at that point. You were like, I don't know, this is a little far ahead of time for that. This seems to bolster that hypothesis of mine. Yeah, they never talk about why they decided, why they needed another Avenger, and why Spider-Man. Like, that does not come up at all. We're just in as we've talked about recently, in medias res, I guess, where they're in the middle of the meeting where they're like, okay, so are we inviting Spider-Man or not?
Right.
It's like, what? Spider-Man uses a couple of really dumb sayings. He says, well, wobble my webs and call me shaky on page 5. And then later on page 18, he says, holy wobbling webs, which, this is something that they sort of played with a little bit like 3 years ago in Marvel Comics, where they were pulling out some of these ridiculous sort of, twisted transistors and stuff like that. But it seems to be back. So that's it. This is a very disappointing issue, unfortunately.
Yeah, especially after those first 2 annuals.
I mean, as a kid, if you were to tell me that issue was about Spider-Man joining the Avengers or the possibility, like, I think just as a sales pitch, you're like, oh, yeah, I want to read this. And then, then you're going to tell me like Daredevil's also in it. And then you realize that he's literally in it for 3 panels. It's like, oh, hey, what are your thoughts on Spider-Man? Solid guy. Take care. I always...
It's just 5 stars, would recommend.
I always found Daredevil to be a hilarious character because he basically just covers Hell's Kitchen, which is what? 4 or 5 blocks of New York.
Yeah, it's a small neighborhood.
You're watching that Netflix series and he's just like, stay out of Hell's Kitchen. That belongs to Daredevil. We're like, okay.
Which is really a nice neighborhood these days, as I understand it.
Yeah, you see the median price of places there? Like, that's a crime.
Stay out of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, I don't have $2 million for a 1-bedroom apartment, so I'm going to stay out of Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, I can't even afford it.
Well, just hike up the price and then everyone will stay out of Hell's Kitchen. And then rename it Clinton, and then there will be no more Hell's Kitchen at all.
Gentrified, man.
So shall we move on to somewhat better things here?
I'll just add quickly that it says, when Spider-Man meets the Hulk, it says, how about you, Tiger? Remember when they met in Spidey #10? It was actually Spidey #13. So Stoical Stan gets that wrong.
Oh, God.
But also the issue that introduced Green Goblin. But okay, yes. So a disappointing issue. I think it ultimately kind of, I think the germ of the issue, which is Spider-Man tries to catch the Hulk for the Avengers and realizes it would be wrong to do it. I think that there's some weight to that. I think that's a solid idea, but it's just a poor execution. I blame Heck. If only Reread had done complete pencils and inks, I think this might have been great, even though the story is, the story maybe with great Reread pencils and inks could have been great. But the whole story still sort of turns on Spider-Man being a jerk, which is sort of out of character. He ironically was almost more of a jerk under Ditko. He's been less of a jerk under Romita, and just seems really out of character now for him to be like this.
So shall we move on to somewhat better things here with the Fantastic Four King Size Special? #4. The cover has a lot of text on it. You see 2 different flaming torches fighting each other, one of which is clearly our Human Torch. The other one is much more orange. The little lines on his body are patterned a little bit differently. He's got a different kind of flame coming off of him in many ways. It says, all new, the sensation of the century. The original Human Torch actually returns from the past to battle Johnny Storm. Extra bonus, you'll finally see the origin of the Human Torch as created in 1939. And then they have a little inset with some of the extra reprint stuff that's in here with a little caption hyping it.
Well, so we should just say going in that this is, I think, again, a much weaker book than Fantastic Four Animals #1, 2, and 3. And more importantly, it's sort of a shameful issue. This issue exists for bad reasons. That Carl Burgos was suing Marvel and saying that you are using my character Human Torch and you are having great success with him in the pages of the Fantastic Four. So Martin Goodman ordered Stan Lee to do this issue, saying that you've got to make it clear that the Human Torch we're using is not the original Human Torch. You have to bring back the original Human Torch, and you have to kill him off. So that, to make it clear, we are not making any money off Carl Burgos' creation. And that will hopefully kill his lawsuit. and indeed it helped do that. So this is sort of a shameful issue that
I had never heard that before.
It is being used in a lawsuit. This issue exists for bad reasons and helped do a bad thing. So already, but now let's see if the issue is actually any good on its own merits.
It's okay. The splash page also has just a ton going on. The Torch That Was, featuring Wyatt Wingfoot, the Mad Thinker, Lockjaw, the Fabulous Fantastic Four, the Amazing Android, and the electrifying entity known as Quasimodo. Actually, do we see the Amazing Android in here at all? I don't know if we do.
I don't think we do.
Yeah. No, I hadn't noticed that caption until I just now read it out loud, and I'm like, wait a minute, we didn't see him in here. Conceived and created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Now, Matt, you've been pointing out that of late they have been giving Stan Lee and Jack Kirby co-creator credit in a way that does not say Stan Lee is the writer and Jack Kirby is the illustrator. Here they then say Stan Lee scenarist and Jack Kirby illustrator. So once again, who knows how far in advance this was done and whether or not that had been implemented yet. Inked and lettered by Joe Sinnott, delineator, and Sam Rosen, calligrapher, and recited and ignited by Irving Forbush, part-time non-entity. And we have, the Mad Thinker looking at this computer. You see Quasimodo, which is really quite a great visual. And then he's also looking at the Fantastic Four and Wyatt Wingfoot, as well as the Fantastic Four battle. Just very, very crowded. Okay, so to try to get through this relatively quickly, and it almost always means that I'm going to go way over when I say that, but the Fantastic Four is going through fan mail, and one of the letters says, "Hey, do you know anything about the original Human Torch?" I'm like, I don't know anything. The only thing I know about him is I heard he might not even be a human. And then suddenly Lockjaw, Johnny, and Wyatt appear. Now, in the regular series, they are in the middle of teleporting all over the universe, it seems, with Lockjaw trying to get him to take them back to the Inhumans. So this is in the middle of all that. I do like the way that they sort of figured a way to work this into that stuff without it feeling shoehorned in timeline-wise. So Johnny is having his teenage angst about his girlfriend being stuck away from him. They feed Lockjaw a bunch of milk, and then apparently he, explodes, or does he actually teleport?
He teleports.
One way or the other, there's a huge explosion and he disappears. Later, we will find out sort of off panel that he comes back to that location, but we're not going to see that on panel. It's going to happen in the gutters. So the Mad Thinker has somehow recovered the body of the original Human Torch and is doing some experimenting. He then is able to make him able to not just uncontrollably be on fire all the time, which was part of his original origin. The Thinker makes it clear that he brought the original Human Torch back to life, and he can end that life as well. So he must obey all of the Mad Thinker's commands, or else he will be destroyed. So with Lockjaw gone, Johnny is getting all impatient, and he's like, I've got something I want to try. I'll just fly out here, and hey, I'll just go behind those hills to that desert, which presumably looks like it's just a few miles away from New York City. Clearly he had gone to Saguaro National Park or something like that. He's out in New Mexico or Arizona, but the script makes it sound like, oh yeah, that desert, that's just over the hills from New York City.
As several people pointed out, the type of cactus that he goes and sees is a very unusual type of cactus, but it's the one we picture when we say cactus because of Charles Schultz, because it was the cactus that Charles Schultz preferred and would put in peanuts when they would go to Snoopy's whatever grandfather or whatever who lived up
Snoopy's cousin, right? Yeah.
So that's why
in Needles, California. I somehow remember that little detail. Anyway, Johnny's trying out this thing that he was going to try out, and then there's this big heat tornado of some sort that shows up, and there's the original Human Torch, and they end up getting into a big battle. And, it's fine. Not Jack Kirby's most amazing stuff ever. But they end up melting through the floor of the desert into some caverns. They continue their fight, and it's clear that the original Human Torch doesn't really want to do harm to Johnny, but he feels that he has to because Quasimodo will do something to him. He's like, Quasimodo, what's that? So on page 13, Saguaro National Park is destroyed. I hope that Tucson, Arizona is okay. It doesn't look like it would be. So, like, destroy a mountain. So the Mad Thinker is thinking, okay, well, I can't tell what happened, but, he must have died. Meanwhile, let me go talk to Quasimodo. Now, in the past, the Mad Thinker's artificial intelligence that he was working with was the awesome android. And he wasn't really much of an intelligence. He was really kind of an automaton. Later, he will get more intelligence, more personality in the Marvel Universe as the years go on. But here we see his artificial intelligence, which is just inside a computer. And I really do like the design on page 13, where you see the machine that the screen for his face is on. It looks like, oh, there are the shoulders, and then here's this big curved back behind the head, which is nice.
Quasimodo is short for, he says, my greatest mistake was to give you a name. I should have merely referred to you as a quasi-motivational destruct organ instead of shortening it to Quasimodo.
Yes, which is okay. Yeah, I would definitely call him Quasimodo in that case because that's a super dumb name. So, and it makes no sense even quasi-motivational. Okay, fine. This is comic book science. This is just something to make the name work. So it becomes clear that Quasimodo also does not want to obey the Thinker's order. It's like he just wants to be a real boy, basically. But the Mad Thinker has something called a discipline beam, which he is using to keep Quasimodo in line. And then he's using Quasimodo to keep the original Human Torch in line. So the fight is still going on in the desert Southwest, or possibly just over some hills from New York City, whichever one you want to believe. And then the Fantastic Four and Wyatt Wingfoot show up. Turns out that Lockjaw must have gotten back to the Baxter building and then teleported all of them to where this fight is going on. Then Lockjaw is able to teleport all of them to the Mad Thinker's lab. So the Mad Thinker is saying, okay, well, the original Human Torch isn't doing what I told him to do, so now I will hit the destruct button and destruct the guy. But once again, he uses Quasimodo to then hit a thing that then attacks the original Human Torch. There's really no reason for Quasimodo to be here. I like that he's here. I like the introduction of this quote-unquote character, but there's really no reason to insert him into all this stuff. So the original Human Torch then flames back out again uncontrollably and then seems to go inert. The Mad Thinker gets away, and then Johnny and Wyatt leave with Lockjaw once more to go continue their search for the Inhumans and for Crystal. And then probably the best part of the entire issue is these last three panels on the bottom of page 19. The Mad Thinker has escaped. The Fantastic Four have all gone off to do their stuff. And then it says, while in the next room, alone and untended, a strange, uncanny complex of electronic components speaks in a voice that is not quite a voice. Master, come back. Don't leave me like this. I've served you well. You taught me to think, Master, to understand. But I am able to feel as well. My circuits are fading. My thoughts are growing hazy. Master, Master, I want to be human just once before I die. I could succeed where the android failed. I could destroy the Fantastic Four. And that just feels like the introduction of Quasimodo is pretty much the one most redeeming part of this issue. And an earlier thing, part of Quasimodo's little reverie is saying, but I can reason, I can compute, I can feel. So yeah, that's, I think, let me see if there's anything else that I had to say from my visual notes. One thing I will point out is that right when Lockjaw shows up with Johnny and Wyatt, and Johnny is going off on his whining fit about his romantic life, there's this look from Thing in the background of that panel where he's just looking like, this kid. Like, yeah, we get it. Okay. And there was another one where we start to see the very first panel of page 2. Look, if you have that in front of you, look at Ben Grimm's eyebrow ridge there. This looks very much like his model will be through the 70s and the first half of the 80s. I associate it very much with George Perez's thing that they have there, but I think this is the first time we've seen that. Let's see. Is there anything else? No, that I think was it. Yeah, it's okay.
So this is the first Fantastic Four annual we've had inked by Joe Sinnott, who is the greatest inker of Kirby's run on Fantastic Four. But I think one of my biggest problems with this issue is just that, I mean, normally having a bunch of pages of a member of the Fantastic Four being in a big knockdown fight with somebody else is like, well, that's great. That's what Kirby's so good at. But if they're both flaming, you know, they're just like, look at page 15, they're just flying around and shooting flames at each other. And I'm like, this is just, I just don't, you know, just two people shooting flames at each other just doesn't interest me anywhere near as much as if we'd had, as we have in the reprints in the back, Hulk versus Thing wailing on each other. Like Hulk versus Thing wailing on each other, that's what Kirby is so good at. But flaming guys flaming at each other, it's just not as interesting to me. Dan, what did you think of this issue?
Right. So you've already illustrated certain points that I find. I really felt like Quasimodo stole the show for me. Like he was a really fantastic character, just this tortured robot, android, living AI thing that wants to be human, right? I just thought that was fantastic. And then, you're right. Johnny Storm, you know, he's like, I have this plan. And you realize that the plan was just to burn hotter, right? like, well, you are the Human Torch. You do have limited skills there, pal, right? The other aspect of these things that I really find amusing is some of the character designs for these villains, you know, like the Thinker. I couldn't stop just looking at the absurdity of his hair and whatnot. It makes me think about you know, villains like the Shocker, right? You know, and he has the lightning bolts coming out of his face. And I'm just thinking, no one would take you seriously.
Oh, that's Electro. The Shocker is just wearing the quilted vest. Right.
And so, you know, you're looking at Electro's mask, and like everyone in the room would be laughing at this guy. Like, this is what you came up with? You're absurd. Now, admittedly, I was a late follower of the Fantastic Four. And I remember you were mentioning that the cover was very type heavy. And as I grew up, I just remember every issue of the Fantastic Four covers always felt very type heavy. What was the tagline that they put on? It was like America's favorite comic, or what was it?
The world's greatest comic magazine, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And it's almost like when you call, you know, red delicious apples. They happen to not be the best apples, but you say it, you know. So there was always this campiness to the Fantastic Four, and I have to say, I feel like a big part of it is Ben Grimm. He's this grizzly veteran guy that just has this no care attitude. I don't want to say I have a distaste for him, but I think, you know, just to align my love for the Hulk. You know, and as I said before, I did read the rest of the annual. Ben Grimm was just this character to me that was always fighting, but he just wouldn't stop talking. But it wasn't with this witty nuance of, you know, zingy one-liners like Spider-Man would do. Ben Grimm's sense of humor is more like, no, you're stupid, kind of, you know, like humor. And so I remember clearly, like, one of the earliest Fantastic Four issues that I read, it was actually that iconic cover where he becomes the spiky thing for a while.
Oh, right.
I remember because I was also reading the Hulk, and this was shortly after Todd McFarlane's run when the Hulk gets blown up by the gamma bomb, right? And then he ends up being a bouncer in Vegas, and he was very sun sensitive, so he couldn't be out in the sun. But what's the first thing Thing wants to do? He got this new body. He's like, I want to go kick his ass, right? And so that was always my issue with the Thing. It was like he was this hero, but he always had like this beef with the Hulk, you know, and he's a character that looks extremely cool, but never. I kind of thought he was kind of a jerk, to be honest with you, you know. So he's kind of a tough character to like.
Yeah. So, Dan, what is your relationship to Kirby? What, as a graphic novelist, do you, Kirby is sometimes called the king of comics. He's regarded as, possibly the greatest comic book artist of all time. Do you agree with that? Have you had to grapple with Kirby over the years?
No, I was a tremendously huge fan of Kirby. One thing I notice in some of these issues that we've been reading here, and something that I sometimes notice as an inconsistency elsewhere that you don't tend to find so much nowadays, unless you're Rob Liefeld, is inconsistencies of proportion and other things, right? So, I mean, I understand the rush of trying to get things done, but sometimes you'll see a panel where the Spider-Man's almost the same size as the Hulk, or right. Maybe one hand is just absolutely enormous, or one drawing of a face just doesn't look like it's made by even the same artist, right? I having worked in comics for many years, of my own titles, I understand how difficult it is to do month over month, panel over panel. Like it's not an easy thing to do. But yeah, he's a legend. I have to give Kirby his due.
So this book, he's inked by Santat, and then in the Thor annual, which we're about to talk about, he's inked by Coletta. How inker sensitive are you? Are you like, oh my God, this is a completely different book, inked by Santat versus inked by Coletta?
I'm not really well versed on the little nuances, like you both seem to be. I mean, I think just as a craftsman, I'm not someone who can be overly critical about artists because I just appreciate what they do. I can maybe be nitpicky about little details, but only if they're glaringly obvious, right? Like, I mean, there's that iconic, Rob Liefeld where Captain America's torso is like really out of proportion. And you spend all that time inking it and you're thinking, buddy, like, you should know better. That's really, that's awful, right? But I look at my own comics and I'm guilty of being sloppy and just kind of being lax on certain panels, things like that. I actually admire all the details in like the Thinker's Lab, for instance, all the machinery and everything. I mean, it's very generic, but it's also beautifully stylized. And I just look at the amount of work just on that one panel, and I'm thinking, yeah, no, someone who did this actually, really loved the craft. And then you can tell that they love drawing machinery because a couple panels below, it's Johnny Storm flying through New York City and the buildings are absolutely generic, right? So you can see these things. You can see like, oh, this person absolutely loves to draw mountains and machinery, but buildings, not so much.
That's funny. Yeah. I always noted that Ditko's cities had more character than Kirby's.
Yeah.
But okay, let's go ahead and move on to King Size Special, The Mighty Thor, number 2, 1966. Who Dares Defy the Destroyer? All new. So we have a very exciting thing. We have had Thor in his own book. It used to be called Journey into Mystery. Now it's just called Thor. And he has been doing stuff in modern day stories, such as fighting Loki and the Destroyer, a giant robot originally created by Odin. And then there's been these backups in the back of the book where he has been hanging out with these 3 buddies, the Warriors 3. And correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, is this the first time we've seen the Warriors 3 interacting with a modern day Thor?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I think so. So here we are bringing the back half of the book and the front half of the book together because we have Thor fighting the Destroyer with the Warriors 3. The Warriors 3 are 3 of my all-time favorite Marvel characters. Volstagg may be my all-time favorite Marvel character, and to have him come up to modern day and fight modern day menaces is just great. We have The Mighty Thor, If Asgard Falls, scripted in Solemn Splendor by Stan Lee, illustrated in idealistic imagery by Jack Kirby. So that's interesting. They do not get credit on the same line. They are credited separately as writer and artist. As you say, this may predate when they started getting co-equal credit. Delineated in delicious delicacy by Vince Coletta, unfortunately. Lettered in living luminescence by Sam Rosen, unfettered by the unabashed utterances of Irving Forbush. So I don't know if you know this, Dan, but one of the rules that Jack Kirby made for himself just to make his life much harder for no reason other than sheer sadomasochism is he decided that every time he drew Odin would have a different helmet on.
What?
And every time we see Odin's throne, it would be a different throne.
What?
And so Kirby ended up doing, however many issues of Thor he did, 70 issues of Thor. And in almost all 70 of those issues, Odin had a new helmet. And there was also a general rule that the helmets had to get increasingly fabulous with every issue. And so we begin with the first page of this story, If Asgard Falls, and Odin, oh my God, his poor neck is going to be crushed by this huge helmet he has on, which is absolutely amazing.
Sometimes you have to suffer for fashion.
He also has an amazing sword.
Odin is peacocking like nobody else in this panel.
He's the king of flair here.
So Odin is announcing the Tournament of Titans, a sort of Asgardian version of the Olympics, fighting for a suit of golden armor. The first page really is well inked. Even the arms are not terrible Coletta arms. We've talked before, Dan, about how Coletta has been getting better as an inker, but he still puts way too many lines on every arm. And you can see that even on the first page. You can see it even more on the second page. The second page, you have these three torchbearers who come up, and they all three have Coletta arms, unfortunately, and they all three have Coletta faces, including Coletta eyes, which is to say that the eyes looked like they were inked not with a pen, not with a brush, but with an X-Acto knife. It looks like he is just using an X-Acto knife to gouge holes in the Bristol board here, and just looks awful. But Odin lights three torches, has them take them up to a torch, has them light the torch. We then see people all over Asgard getting their summons. And then we see, last we saw Loki, he was being sent off into space alongside the Absorbing Man. Well, even rocketing into space, they can't be rid of each other. So they're still floating in space next to each other. I don't know if it's colored this way with yours, but they're colored sort of green and mossy.
Yeah.
So like they're covered in green moss. Like, what, don't you need a source of water in order to grow any sort of green lichen, moss, grass, whatever this is supposed to be? I don't think Loki has a water source. If he does, I don't want to know about it. And Absorbing Man, but they are floating in space, sort of as if they are planets now covered in green something. But then Loki is able to think with his mind and says, I'm going to reach out and activate the destroyer to crash these little games. Meanwhile, we then get delightfully the Warriors 3, who show up and are interacting with everybody. We have them in modern day now. And Hogan is saying to Hogan the Grim, one tourney is like another. And Volstagg says, not so with valorous Volstagg. This shall be my hour of supreme triumph. At last I shall prove that I am every bit as powerful as I am undeniably handsome. And I've said before, Dan, that Volstagg is very much Stanley just basically teleporting Falstaff from the Henry IV plays directly into the Marvel Universe. You can tell that Stanley just loves Shakespeare. He loves Falstaff. And he has created Volstagg to bring him in.
One thing you just passed over that is probably my favorite part of the entire book is page 5, where Odin is, going through his reverie and Thor is standing there listening dutifully. And then the Warriors 3 come from outside a window and they're all whispering, basically like, hey, Thor, get out of there. We've got some fun to go be had. Come on. And, Thor's like, shut up. You're going to get me in trouble with Dad. And then eventually Odin's like, oh, I remember when I was young and want to do that. I'll let you go. But that and, Fandral is sitting on Volstagg's shoulders to be able to get up to the height to see through the window and do this. And that's probably my favorite page in the entire issue. So I just wanted to make sure that we didn't leave that one behind.
Yes. So then they are soon Brawling is breaking out pre-tournament, and they get in sort of a barroom brawl with a bunch of very large, are they supposed to be trolls or ogres or whatever? And then they are all fighting their sort of matches in this group. And then it turns out one of them, a troll, they say, looks like a little person, a literal troll, about 3 or 4 feet high. They all sort of pair off with who they want to fight. And it ends up with Volstagg being paired off with this little 3 foot high troll. And Volstagg says, since you alone remain, I do not question the will of fate. Fearless Volstagg shall not shirk the deadly ordeal. I shall challenge you. And the troll says, think twice, buffoon. Perhaps there is one yet smaller than I. And Volstagg says, but nay, size means nothing. Big as thou art, I shall fight thee. So then meanwhile, Loki comes back to Earth, finds the destroyer where it was last abandoned, brings it forth. Absolutely amazing page on page 13. Big splash page of the destroyer surrounded by Kirby Crackle, rising out of the earth. Yeah. Now talking like Loki, saying, I live again. another splash page. We've got back-to-back splash pages on page 14 where they are all gathered in an arena that is beautiful Kirby architecture to begin their tourney. We see them all fighting. They go into battle. Fantastic pages. Not terribly inked by Coletta, but would have been so much better inked by Santat, of them all clashing on their horses, banging into each other. Volstagg is finally going into battle. He is snuck up on from behind and gets conked out. Meanwhile, the Destroyer shows up on the Rainbow Bridge, fights Heimdall, or Heimdall, however it's pronounced, and defeats him, is going in. We get a wonderful art on page 20 of Volstagg has gotten walloped on the butt in such a way that has hurt him enough that he is now tying a giant pillow onto his butt to cushion it from this point on. Oh, basest of infamy to think that ever alert Volstagg could have been taken by surprise. And then he is tying that on, and they get in a fight. Finally, Volstagg gets to fight the little troll, but then it turns out that he turns into a giant troll and is beating up Volstagg, but then shrinks small again. But then who should show up but the Destroyer? The Destroyer first buries Volstagg in rubble and then is fighting everybody else. Odin is like, uh-oh, I created the Destroyer a long time ago and didn't think I'd see it again. This is not good. Everybody stops fighting each other. They fight the Destroyer. Fantastic page on page 25. We should point out that the other two annual stories we read were 20 pages, but this one is 30 pages. And they are... Thor and the Destroyer are walloping each other. Great page on page 25. But then sort of disappointing ending to the issue. Sort of a Deus Ex Machina. It turns out that the day is saved by none other than Balder, who Odin has sent off Balder to try to figure out what's going on and why the Destroyer is back. And Balder has figured out it's because of Loki. And then Odin just sort of sends out a mental whammy to Loki. And it's like, go to sleep, go to sleep. And puts Loki to sleep, and then the Destroyer falls over with a big clunk and is now not useful. Odin turns everybody's clothes orange, turns everybody's clothes into gold, but Volstagg, his clothes did turn into gold, but he is still buried under rubble. And he says, "Fie upon it, I shall wait for rescue, and I pray it may be a long time coming, for there are many memories to savor, memories of the glory of Asgard that shall live forever in the hearts of men." And then it says, "Verily we have spoken." So that is the end of this issue. This was my favorite of the three issues. I think it is absolutely delightful. I love having my beloved Volstagg in modern day. I love having the Destroyer get to go up against modern day Asgardians. I think just Asgard looks fantastic. I think Odin's helmet is fabulous. I think that this is a wonderful issue. Dan, what did you think of this issue?
There was one thing that really stood out to me in this issue, and you're talking about your love for Volstagg. The thing that I noticed is that despite him being the largest character in this issue, he draws Volstagg with this amazingly beautiful fluid flow, like almost in a very ballerina kind of presentation, like just the folds of the body and everything. They just flow so well. Like, for example, if we're looking at the bottom right panel of page 21, you see Volstagg facing off with the Destroyer. Now you see the motion of Volstagg, and there's just a beautiful flow to him, right? And then you have him standing next to the Destroyer, and you see how incredibly rigid and stiff the Destroyer is. Even at the top of the panel where, he's fighting the Weaver of Spirits, like there's just a beautiful flow to Volstagg's body language. And if there's anything to take away from this issue, I absolutely loved the way he drew Volstagg in this entire issue. Also, I think we were all being critical of the tight line work in some of the details of the arms and things like that. But, a lot of my art influence kind of came from, Kirby, and then moving on to French artists like Mobius. And then, there was some great Japanese artists like Masamune Shiro, who really embraced, that really tight line work that would just set the flow of motion of the folds and the turning of the form and things like that. And so, of the three issues that we read, like this hands down to me was my favorite of all the artwork, and, probably, would be the closest to what my influences, resulted in what becomes my style. Mm-hmm. Now, It's interesting because I'm looking at the big full spread of 14, where you're seeing, the entire Asgard world. And I'm not really familiar with the history of the comic artists and their relationships, but I remember my initial thought of looking at that, and I couldn't help but think that it seemed like maybe it influenced or was influenced of like Walt Simonson.
All of this stuff was just a huge influence on Walt Simonson.
Yeah. Like I looked at that. There's just a beautiful. There was one thing that really stood out to me in this issue, and it was just a really great sense of composition of space, which is something like, I just absolutely loved it. So, while you're looking at I'm looking at like page 15, and you're just looking at the armies on horses, on horseback in the background, all colored in purple. But I mean, I would never have the patience to draw that in just one panel.
Well, you think about Kirby this year did 12 issues of Fantastic Four, 12 issues of Thor, 12 issues of Captain America. He did layouts for, I think, every issue of Nick Fury and Hulk. And then he at the end of the year, had to do these massive annuals, had to do an additional 20-page Fantastic Four annual and a 30-page Thor annual. And he is just, he just loves it. He just, you give him this workload that would just absolutely crush any modern Marvel artist. I guarantee you that no artist working for Marvel did 30 books this year. And it's just, or whatever that would be, 37 books, however many that would be. And to then put this level of detail, to put in, just on the background of that page, a whole army on horses galloping in, it's just insane. It's just insane he would do that.
Yeah. I remember reading, so we're kind of breaking away from the Marvel thing here, but I remember reading Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa, right? And it was in 4 volumes. And you're just looking at the amount of detail that is in that entire collection. And I feel like for anybody, it would probably be someone's lifetime work, right? And then you realize, oh no, this was just his first. Right? And you'll see some people who are just so fabulously economical with their line work. Like they don't have to do a lay-in, they just go right into it. Like I don't know if you've ever you've probably seen YouTube videos of this Korean master artist, Kim Jong-ji. I don't know if you're familiar with him. So typically what you'll see in his videos is he'll have this big white piece of paper, probably spanning 12 feet by 4 feet high, right? And without any construction lines, without any, kind of lay-in, he just grabs, an ink brush pen, and he just starts drawing this entire scene. And and what's frustrating is that it's perfect perspective. All the detail is just...
Oh my God. Yeah, I'm just looking this up now. Wow.
It's amazing how economically efficient and how talented this person is, where if you're an artist and you're watching it, it kind of gets you kind of get furious because you're like, how come he's so gifted? Like, how come he's so good? And at the same time, you're just completely enamored at the fact that, he's so talented and so good. And you look at the work here of Kirby and you talk about the amount of work that he's done in a year. And there's just some people who are just built like that, right? And that you'll never be that economical. Now, I will say, so I just recently finished inking a 216-page graphic novel of my own. Now, starting off when I did my first graphic novel 13 years ago, it was like 219 pages. It took me about, I would say it took me about a year and a half to ink 219 pages. So I look at this and I'm completely in awe. Now, recently I just finished the book 2 of that series, and I did it in 6 months. And I compare the work from 13 years ago to the one that I did now, and it looks like it's been made by a completely different person. So there is something to be said about putting in that mileage year after year and just being really comfortable in your ability to draw the way you draw. And so, obviously, all these artists have put in the miles, and, it's just second nature to them. But, I am in awe. Like, I love looking at this stuff. And it's like I said, it is those little details that I admire, and just the willingness to sit there and say, yeah, I'm going to draw every muscle of this horse just galloping towards you. Like, it's just, yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I have found that no matter what creative endeavor you're talking about, really what separates the truly great from the professional probably is some sort of ineffable,
Right.
spark that we might call talent. But the vast majority of what makes an artist or a singer or a musician or whatever just really good at what they do is just having the drive to
Right.
do it all the time. Right. It's like I read the oral history of Van Halen that came out a few years ago, and just all the talking about how, like, Eddie Van Halen, when he was in high school, just be like, OK, I need to get done whatever else I have to get done and then get it done as quickly as possible so I can go and practice guitar. And he was like already the best guitarist in in the scene at the time. But it's like, nope, I have to go and practice guitar for several hours because that's what I want to do. And that's why I get this good. Nice. Well, let me go ahead and give my thoughts on this issue, and then we can start to wrap up. I noticed that we had the Warriors 3 saying, "Hey, Thor, come on! There's a bunch of brawling and carousing to be had." Specifically, used the word brawling, and then when they get to the brawl, Thor is like, "But don't these people know that brawling is forbidden before the contest begins?" Which I found remarkable. When it's being described how far away Loki is, they use the term thought years as opposed to light years. And that's actually one thing that Stan Lee seems to be enamored of, the speed of thought being the fastest thing. He uses that phrase a lot, at the speed of thought. And some things are like, oh, it transports you at the speed of thought. And, that's the fastest speed. There's one time when someone was saying that, and Bruce Banner was like, well, of course, that goes without saying. That's the thing. It's like, does it? Yeah. So when the destroyer is getting ready to blast, there's some kind of blast that's going to come more or less out of his face that's going to finish off Odin. And he folds down that big fork-looking thing in front of his face, and that's what's going to send the Force Bolt. And I was noticing that in contrast to how the Destroyer was handled in the Thor movie, where instead those little bands of metal that were over his face sort of louvered up, and then you could see kind of the furnace back behind there that was about to blow stuff away. And I actually like the way they did it in the movie a little bit better, but it's but I just noticed that was a decision that they clearly made, that they were like, we're going to do this a little differently. It did sort of bother me that the Olympics are not Norse. I mean, and I know they never say this is the Olympics, but I mean, there's the eternal flame we're going to light. And, here you come together, people from all over coming together for this big thing. That did sort of bother me, sort of felt a little bit, just sort of felt like, yeah, well, that's not the thing. But the battle that they had does remind me of what the descriptions of Valhalla are supposed to be like. That, if you die in battle, you were supposed to be transported to Valhalla, where you essentially engage in battle all day, specifically like, getting wounded and mangled and killed and whatever. And at the end of the day, you are healed and go off to the mead hall to celebrate with everybody. And this feels very much like that. Page 18, there's just a fantastic. There's a really, let's say, notable panel where Volstagg is getting clobbered, and we don't actually see the clobbering. We just see a big spiral that looks like something out of the Batman TV show, which was, of course, contemporary with this, with a big splock, and just very much seems like a Batman TV show frame just sort of shoved into this panel here.
Actually, if I could interject, I really do want to give props to Sam Rosen and his ability to the onomatopoeia throughout the book, the lettering. And is a very underrated thing that people don't regard, but the onomatopoeia in this was just fantastic. It was really well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a ton of it in this issue. And the way the blacks are outlined on the lettering changes from word to word depending on what effect he wants to go for. It's really remarkable. It's really excellent.
Yeah.
And Spock has a drop shadow, whereas other things
Spock has
a drop shadow, and then Spang has a light outline, and Chalk has a heavy outline, and it's really excellent lettering from Rosen. I'm glad you called that out.
So the last two things are just, you already talked about the Deus Ex Machina effect of Balder just sort of coming in. And it really does bother me how there was never anything where you look back and you're like, oh, that's why Odin was talking to Balder, or that's why he said, oh, I've got something I need to do over here, fetch me somebody. There's no callback. It's just out of the blue. And when he comes in, I don't know about in your copy, but here he's colored green with those little speed lines. And at first I thought, oh, this is Loki.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's the same color. And, that's something on whoever colored this, that was a poor choice, in my opinion. And then the last thing is just that at the end, it's like, well, I just wanted everybody to have fun and do their best. So now everybody gets a trophy. So everybody gets the golden armor. Yay! Which does just very much feel like it's under 5 soccer. Anyway, so that's what I have to say.
Okay, Dan. Well, do you have any final thoughts on 1966 Marvel Annual?
You know what? It in my mind, it takes me to a better place. Earnest, innocent, a lot of fun. There was a period where you're thinking of like the older like 90s issues where Frank Miller was doing the really dark, heavy, Dark Knight Returns. This felt very Adam West Batman. And for me, I feel like there can be these trends where these writers try to get darker and darker and darker. This was just a breath of fresh air. It was just really nice to just see, superheroes be heroes, villains be villains, just be, it's okay to be black and white, good versus evil. Obviously a lot of writers put little nuances and more complexities into their characters, which make them, more compelling. But there's just something about this that just screams, "Aw, shucks!" that I can enjoy. That it's fun. It's I guess the best word to say is wholesome.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was so great to have you here for our 100th episode. Finishing up 1966.
Fantastic. I had a great time.
I am so glad you had a good time. I'm so glad. I wish I had reminded you not to read all of the issues, but I hope you enjoyed all the backup issues that you read.
Oh, no. How dare I have to read all of those comics?
Well, I don't know. One of the Thor backup issues was a R. Burns issue penciled by Joe Santat, which is really, really not great. But
yeah.
But then you got to read the Enchantress issue, and that was a good one.
That was still fun. And that was, I never, there were certain things that were peeking out in those issues that I never realized. In one of the other annuals where, the Human Torch got injured and he was wearing asbestos pajamas under asbestos sheets, behind a asbestos curtain, and, what was the one? Oh, in order for Mr. Fantastic to handle the Human Torch while he was on fire, he dipped his hand into liquid asbestos, and then, of course, the rest of the issue, he was sick. And, of course, being the smartest man in the world, he's like, I don't understand why I'm sick. And you're like, well, Reed, maybe it's because you dipped your hand in asbestos.
Yes.
Got mesothelioma.
Oh, shucks.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We would love to have you on again anytime. Congratulations on your Caldecott, on your National Book Award. I assume the book you were saying that you just inked is Sidekicks Volume 2, which I cannot wait to read. My kids love Sidekicks Volume 1. Okay, well, should we go ahead and wrap up there, Steve?
Yeah, let's go ahead and say goodbye to our audience. So thank you, everybody out there in podcast land. And I can't believe that we've made it to 100 episodes. I am. Oh, and I'm just blown away that we've actually gotten to this point. And also, I wanted to say that we now are available on YouTube as well. And no, we're not appearing in video. It's just basically audio YouTube. YouTube now has a podcasting thing. So we are available there as well if you prefer to get your podcasts through YouTube.
Yes.
But yeah, that. And also, some of you may have had an issue downloading episode 99. Something happened with our RSS feed, and it came in the wrong date. So if you haven't gotten episode 99, you might want to just go look back in your feed, and it's hopefully there. Hopefully we get that fixed. I know I probably should not have said that right in our goodbyes, but thank you, everybody out there in podcast land. Thank you for sustaining us for this long, and take care and stay safe out there.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to MarvelRereadClub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.